Hey now, I hope you're doing fine. Paul Mack here, and I want to talk to you about my favorite farm tool, the bucksaw. The bucksaw. Now maybe you've seen these on old movies like westerns and so forth, or TV shows, and the old guy is out there working on his log cabin or his house or something, and he's sawing with a bucksaw. Maybe even TV shows like Gunsmoke or Little House on the Prairie. You know, a lot of times I remember seeing Michael Landon out there, you know, America's favorite pioneer dad, Charles Ingalls, out there, and he's working on something, and he's got the bucksaw in his hand. Maybe even Little Joe on Bonanza. Come to think of it, perhaps the bucksaw was Michael Landon's favorite farm tool too. Anyway, the bucksaw is sort of a cross between the handsaw and perhaps the one-man cross-cut saw. It's sort of, there's overlap there. It sort of can serve both functions. For one thing, it's good for sawing firewood. You know, like maybe not huge logs necessarily, but smaller limbs and things like that. It's a great tool for your kids to learn that time-honored chore of sawing firewood. It's relatively a safe tool to use as long as they don't go crazy with it. And it even, you know, it's got a handle down here, and you can even, for support, add your other hand when you're sawing. And, you know, if you wanted, you can have another person on the other side holding this side, and one pulls, the other pulls, and one pulls. You never push it if you're using it with two people. But it's great for cutting up firewood. And also, if you're into butchering your own livestock, if you butcher anything from hogs to steers, there's a certain point in the butchering process where you are splitting the carcass down the middle. Usually that involves sawing straight through the spine back there. And if you don't have a bone saw, which is usually the tool of choice for splitting a carcass, a handsaw will work, but this with the larger teeth seems to work even better when splitting a carcass. So it's very useful for butchering purposes like that, and also definitely very useful for log construction. When you're building a log cabin or a log structure, there's some notches that you need a saw to saw down into the end of the wood, and then you split off the excess with a chisel. So it's very useful for that, for rough construction. And also, if you have an orchard, apple orchard, peach orchard, or pecan, whatever it is, and there's certain dead limbs or larger limbs that you'd like pruned, it's a great option for pruning in an orchard. And the way they work, this is so simple, you've probably already figured it out yourself. Basically, this is a tool of tension. There's tension, and this, usually the cross section, however it's made, it forms sort of a fulcrum. There's pressure put here, either with a turnbuckle, like in this situation, or I'll show you this one here in a minute. It's got a stick that you can wind around and put tension on it, and that one has a wing nut on the side. I'll show you those in just a second. But basically, again, a tool of tension. And when this is tightened this way toward each other, then obviously this end, swinging on the fulcrum here, this end, pressure goes this way and this way, making the blade as tight as you need it. Now you can find bucksaws in flea markets, auctions, Cracker Barrel, on the wall. I think I purchased these three in a lot at a recent auction, and they're kind of different. You expect to pay, I don't know, $40, maybe upwards, depending on how rare they are in your area. One of the things that drives the price up is their beautiful combination of wood and metal, and they look so good just hanging on the wall there, which unfortunately drives the price up, because now you're not just competing with other people like Michael Landon who actually want to use them. You're competing with that person who wants it hanging over their fireplace or whatever. This one has just a simple cross piece on it. You might call this more of a common style, and the rest of them I have here have sort of like it's a fancy arch type style. This one is actually one piece of wood that has been split, and the top one is bent. If you can see that, the top part is bent and the bottom one remains flat. That's kind of a unique style. One piece of wood cut down the center and split open. And then this one and the one mine that I showed you earlier is two pieces, and they're both kind of bent and flare outward like that. And it looks like they've got a rivet. Yep, a hole driven here, or a hole drilled here, a hole drilled here, and a rivet put through with a washer, and then hammered down to hold those two pieces together. So you see those two different styles on certain buck saws. You know, this, just as it is, these would be very useful. They're kind of old. This one, some of them are starting to, this one's got a crack. It could continue on. It looks like it's still usable, in good shape. If you wanted to, if you're going to be using this and not hanging it on your wall, you might take some linseed oil like we normally do, and an old cloth, and put several coatings of linseed oil to let that soak into the wood, especially if it's not been oiled in a long time. And it really will bring back a beautiful, richer, sometimes a more brown look to the wood. As far as the blade goes, you could take just emery cloth and sand that down. Maybe 120 grit sandpaper would work too, and you could sand this blade down and get it as shiny as you want it to be again, and then take a light film of 3-in-1 household oil or whatever. Just put a light film of oil on there to protect it and keep it from rusting any further. Now these blades are held in a slot that's sawn down on this edge, and a slot that's just in the middle of this one, and it looks like just a plain rivet. It's not been hammered down on this side, so that when you loosen the tension, you can knock that rivet out from this side and take your blade out, sharpen it, sand it, get it all nice and shiny, and then put it back. It's just a rivet holding it in place on both sides, and then the tension is what ultimately holds the whole blade in place. And I see there's different tooth patterns. This one has more of a cross-cut champion kind of tooth pattern on it, where you've got two teeth and then a raker, which kind of looks like a bunny rabbit in the middle. And that raker generally just pulls the sawdust particles out of the kerf. And on the teeth pair here, one tooth is bent slightly this way, and the other tooth is bent slightly this way. On the others that I have, and that's mine that I use from time to time, you've probably seen me use it in some of the videos to saw wood. This tooth pattern here is more of just a regular tooth pattern. It's just got tooth after tooth. Every other tooth is pointing one direction, and every other tooth next to it is pointing the other direction. So those two patterns that I've seen on most buck saws. A lot of times when you start to saw, especially a green piece of wood, if you're sawing a limb out in your orchard or firewood or whatever, if you've just bought your buck saw and you start sawing, and it about halfway through, or maybe even less, it starts to bind up and you can't go one way or the other, that's usually a good sign that your teeth need setting. And when we're talking about setting teeth, as I've pointed out before, when these are cut out, it's just a blank piece of metal, and they cut the shape of the tooth. Well, these are teeth. Well, the teeth are straight, and that would not, no matter how sharp it is, that would not saw very deeply into any piece of wood. So they will set the teeth, this one slightly this way, this one slightly this way, and that opens up a kerf for the rest of the blade to go through the kerf. So they've got to be set properly. And to do that, you can use a set, kind of looks like pliers, but there's certain angles on there, and when you press it together down onto a tooth, it will slightly bend that tooth one direction. You do, every other tooth, as in the case with most of these, and then turn the saw around and do every other tooth that direction, and then you'll bring those teeth back into their proper set, and it'll be able to cut a whole lot more effectively. Beyond that, you may need to sharpen it too. because a lot of them have set up over years and they've got rust on them. And to do that, it's always easier probably to take your blade out of the saw. And I would, if I were you, I would figure out some way to maybe take a 2x4 or a 1x4 and clamp that to the 1x4, and then clamp the 1x4 to a bench somehow to where it won't move. And then using a small file like this one, and I recommend using the triangular type files, because that triangle shape helps you get into the tooth so that it's not, you don't put a weird hard edge on the tooth next to it. The triangular shape helps you get out into the triangular little hollow of each tooth, and you'll want to do every other tooth. And if you have it down like this, you want to sharpen the tooth that's pointing down toward the floor. Don't sharpen the one that's pointing up, or you'll put the bevel on the wrong side, because each tooth has a bevel on one side, and then you flip it over and every other tooth has, kind of goes the same way. So you're always sharpening on the tooth that's angled down toward the ground. And as I say, put it in some sort of clamp where you can fasten down on this thing, and then you can get good pressure. You don't want to go crazy and change the shape of the tooth. You just want to put a shiny side there, and then a shiny side on that side, and then just go every other tooth all the way down, which obviously is a long and tedious job. So I hope you love sharpening teeth, because you'll get plenty of practice. If you have trouble finding an old saw with the wood already ready to go, and the cross pieces, which incidentally are mortised into this side piece. If you can't find an old saw, maybe you can just find the blade. Sometimes the blades are available in an antique store or something, pretty cheap. Just get a blade and you can really quite easily construct the rest of it. As a matter of fact, let's say you can't find an original bucksaw blade, which is, 1.5 inches, something like that. You can go to just about any hardware store and find a regular blade that normally fits a bow saw, the metal bow saws. These are still readily available in really different sizes. I don't know how long these are. One is slightly longer than the other. If you can't find a regular old bucksaw blade, just go to the hardware store, buy one of these, and construct the rest of it yourself. It really doesn't have to be glamorous. All you need is a cross piece here and a cross piece there, and you can cut a slit in this end, you can cut a slit in this end, and make your cross piece. It doesn't have to be arched like that, although that would be a fun project for you. It could just be a more common style that has one cross piece fulcrum, and you can mortise that in there either with a round hole and put a round dowel peg on your cross piece, or if you want to get fancy and do a more rectangular mortise, tenon and mortise, you can certainly do that. And then up here, you would, one of the things I did when I built one, I think it's up in the loft somewhere, it's not together, or I would have shown you. I think one of the things I did when I built mine is this top piece here, I just basically kind of notched it in. This one sort of has a notch in it, sort of like the end of a bow, for a bow and arrow, and you can put a piece of wire around this and form a loop and join that wire together. And then just kind of like on this one, you can take any old stick. It needs to be something that's not going to snap, and you can see that's got a lot of tension on it, and just put that stick in that wire and wrap it round and round and round until there's more and more tension and it starts to twist. You're wrapping it around until this gets tight enough, and then you just let that rest on the cross piece and you're done. You've got all the tension you need. It doesn't have to be complicated, and you've built your own bucksaw that you can be proud of forever. Who knows, one day it'll be hanging in Cracker Barrel and you would have built it. Well, I guess that will just about do for my favorite farm tool, and perhaps Michael Landon's favorite farm tool, the bucksaw. If you'd like to add to the discussion of the bucksaw, please feel free to do so in the comment section below. I enjoy reading those, and I know everybody else enjoys reading the comments as well. And also, if you would like to shop around for an old bucksaw or any old tool, I invite you to come to our little store in Catagap. My family and I operate a little old-fashioned general store where you'll find all kinds of items, antiques, souvenirs, t-shirts, jellies, jams, candy. Particularly one of my favorite sections is the old tool section, where you'll find several of the tools that I have scrounged around the countryside and found in auctions or flea markets and so forth. Who knows? You might even come and shop and walk away with one of these very bucksaws yourself. I'm not going to mail it to you. That's too hard. You got to come do the shopping in person on your own. That's Gap Mercantile. In the description, I'll have how you can find where Gap Mercantile is and a little bit more about it. So be sure to look that up. Until next time, I'm Paul Mack with my favorite farm tool, the bucksaw. I'll talk at you later.